Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Done and Dusted. I'd like to welcome my trusted poddy, Caroline Council Family Lawyers.
Hi, Darren.
We have a special guest all the way from Perth today, Dr. Phil Watts.
Hi.
Whom I joined in Hobart recently at the Pacifica Congress concert. I chaired his particular session, which was always very valuable. And what we're going to talk about today are the needs of children when it comes to separation. And Dr. Watts is a bag full of knowledge on that particular topic. Welcome, Dr. Phil. Can I go to Dr. Phil Watts?
Yeah, Dr. Phil's fine. And thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I've spent about 30 odd years working with kids when parents are separated. But I've also been a clinical psychologist, and I've seen when kids have grown up and they're now adults and when they reflect on how it was when their parents separate. So it's a great opportunity to share some of the things which kids are going to need both now and into the future. So one of the starting points I'd like to say is that it's not separation which damages children, but it's the conflict. And the better kids can be kept out of the conflict, the better the long-term outcomes for kids. And there's a lot of areas in the family law where we still don't have complete answers, but we know absolutely that if you want to mess kids up, get them in the middle of the conflict. So how do you then keep kids out of conflict is really some of the things I'd like to share today. So as a starting point, I think that before separation, parents they separate because things are not going well, and they get very preoccupied with their own needs and often don't even take the time to tell kids what's going on. And the less you know about what's going on, the more confusing it is, the more anxious you become, and the more frightening it is for kids. So not knowing then creates a situation of great difficulty. So being able to help kids understand what's going on is really interesting, because when I do family court assessments and I'm dealing with the complex breakups, I often ask kids, did you know, was it a surprise that your parents broke up? And you'd be amazed at how many kids will turn around and go, no, I knew it was coming. It wasn't a surprise. And then you go, well, how did you know? And they go, or mum and dad were arguing a lot, or mum and dad weren't getting on, or they weren't talking, but it's even more basic. Mum and dad weren't smiling at each other anymore. They didn't say good morning. So those little things kids are picking up on, and that then creates some anxiety. So unless somebody actually sits them down and talks about it, then they never know what's going on.
Sure. Yeah. You must hear some incredible stories, Phil.
Oh, yeah, it is. And again, I hear incredible stories, but it's also really interesting that whether parents separate in a sort of very organized and child-friendly way, or whether it's a very dysfunctional way, what amazes me is that kids are going to survive, and we're going to find survival strategies. So one of the first things to think about is that when parents separate, there's really only 5 different ways kids can cope with what's going on. One is you can speak your mind, tell people what's going on, but parents spend a lot of their time telling kids what to do. It doesn't come easily for kids to actually speak everything which is going on. Now, if your parents are in conflict, it's even harder to then speak against one parent or another. So how do you cope? Well, one of the most common ways is duck for cover. Tell parents what they want to hear, tell them nothing. And you'll frequently see kids who the parents are complaining, my kids never tell me what's happening on in the other house, they never mention the other house. Well, that's a survival technique. Now, that works on sort of low to moderate conflict, but as the conflict gets higher, then kids are left with only a couple of other options. One is to take sides, and that's where it gets really sad, where I'm going to be with mum or I'm going to be with dad, but I can't be with both parents anymore, so they miss out. And some parents foster that, encourage it. Some parents do it consciously, some parents do it unconsciously. But these poor little kids, end up on having to take sides to cope. And then you end up with one parent being rejected. And that's really damaging for kids. It's really stressful for parents, damaging for parents. And when it gets really bad, I've been in family law for 30 odd years, and often we don't have a solution. It's very hard to unpick kids when they've taken sides. And then the last thing, which is also where kids can have an equally strong relationship with both parents. They love both parents, but both parents are telling them different things, and then they end up trusting no one. The first people in life you should learn to trust are your parents. And if you have now ended up in this position where you can't trust either of your parents, how devastating is that? So that then takes me back to those parents who don't want to damage their kids. The united front is the first and most important thing you can do. If you don't like your ex, that doesn't matter. That's why you're separating. What you've got to be able to do is go, we've got a business here. That business is raising children. I don't have to like my business partner, but I have to be able to work with them to get the best outcome for kids. And what kids need is both parents telling them the same thing in the same way. So the more united the parents can be, giving the kids an explanation why they broke up, what's going to happen next, when somebody's moving out, where they're going to move, the better it is for the kids. And the united front is really, really hard to achieve. It takes parents to be more mature than the children. One of my favorite sayings there is you got to love your kids more than you hate your partner.
That's so true.
But some of it's really resonating, that saying in particular, Phil, but I also think that whole idea of we are now in the business of parenting. There are two company directors, if you will, mum and dad.
Yep.
And there's some shareholders, the children. So we're actually going to behave like we would behave in business. And I think if you can give people that sort of roadmap about this is now a different relationship, easier said than done though, Phil. How do you get them to switch from, I hate this person, I hate being with them, I hate what they did to me. How do you get them to switch into that more business-like, more formal, more polite mode? What's your sell? What are you selling parents to get them to behave better?
The one thing which parents consistently buy is the happiness of their kids. And even in the really difficult cases, saying that this will damage your child can be a wake-up call to parents. And it's almost, little things like if the parents are going to try and work something out for the kids, ideally the kids shouldn't be there unless they're older and we're having a family meeting type approach, the low-end conflict. But if there's a bit of conflict, having a picture, a photograph of the kids on the table when mum and dad are talking about them, and if things start getting heated, one or other of them just point to the picture and go, that's why we're here, to bring them back to the reality.
It's a hard sell, isn't it? Because, just taking things back to basics, it's hard to see where you as a person are going to be in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And if parents are actually, our best weapon, of course, is the children, because everyone doesn't matter what race you are or what demography, everyone wants what's best for their children, right? So, but it's very hard to say, okay, well, looking down the track, this is what you can expect. Little Sally's going to be like. She's going to have educational issues. She's going to have social issues. She's going to have relationship problems. She may have drug and alcohol issues, blah, blah, blah. It's very hard for parents to picture that when they're embroiled in this conflict, isn't it? So what you said before, I like that word pick. You need to pick them out of that conflict and get them to refocus and reframe in terms of what's going to advance that child's best interest moving forward.
Absolutely. And the other thing to remember is that in separation, in almost all cases, there's an initiator and a non-initiator. Somebody's ready to go and they want to go, and they're all charged up, ready for their life. And there's the person who's left behind. And that can come, I've seen people where it's completely out of the blue. But even if it's by agreement, one person's probably further ahead with it. And just even recognizing that one person's going to have to start going through the emotions today, whereas the other person's already done their grief already, can help both people to go, we're in different places here. So I need to cut some slack for my partner who hasn't done, or my ex-partner now, who hasn't done the grieving. And I need to be able to recognize that I'm further on. And if people are stuck with the emotion, is being able to get some help so they don't bring the emotion into the decision. The worst business decisions are done emotionally. The best one is done on facts.
So, Phil, just at that point, because it's a really crucial intersection, what you're talking about, as far as, do I open that door or do I open this door? For people to make those choices, what is the best help people can get? I mean, I know that's a broad question because every family is unique, but in general terms, what is the best help people can get at that early stage so that they don't move forward, continuing on with their hate, continue to make mistakes which impact on the kids?
Yeah, finding people who can help you understand what the kids need. Sometimes people will seek out people who support their cause rather than support the kids' cause. And the more they align with people who are going to, help us win, help us punish the ex, the more we're going to get lost. And that can be lawyers, that can be psychologists, that can be friends, that can be family. But what people really need to get their head around early is, I need to be the one big enough to decide what's best for my children, and then build everything back from that platform. And
go on, sorry, I cut
I was just going to say, their friends may not agree with that. And some people will go, well, you've got to get back at him, you've got to try and win. It's not about winning, it's about trying to get the best outcome for your little people.
There are no winners, really.
No.
Caroline's a significant interventionist, an early interventionist, from my observations over the years. What do you think? What's your take on that, Caroline?
Look, I'm pretty brutal. For example, if I have a client that is demanding the blood of their former partner on my carpet and perceive that to be my role, I recognise their vulnerability as a user of legal services. I try, obviously, Phil and Darren, to get them into counselling as soon as possible. But I also paint for them a picture of what future they're creating. And as Darren said, it's really hard for them to get to see or imagine the damage that they're doing so early on. And then I'll talk quite frankly about what it's going to cost them, and the fact that they're feathering my nest and my family rather than looking after their own children. They're prioritizing me to be able to send children to school as opposed to their own children to school. Does that make sense? And
it does. And it's again, what you've got to remember is, at that point, they're responding in anger.
Yeah.
And if you go through what's the grief process, after shock is anger.
Yeah.
And then from there, you start doing the grieving, and then you get resolution. So some of the people who are most stuck are the people who are in that early stage anger. And then the things snowball and get bigger and bigger because I'm angry, it gets a response. And then next minute we're getting restraining orders and lawyers and intervention, and then it blows out of control. Whereas if they could have, tempered that anger back a bit, then the outcome could have been quite different.
Yeah, I agree. It is a runaway train, and they tend to also attract not necessarily the right people on the team that could have sent it in a much more positive direction. So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy of their anger attracting the wrong type of people to assist.
I think, Phil, and Caroline, you might be able to assist here too. We often see clients who have gone to counsellors, and those counsellors, they might be qualified to do what they do, but they don't have the background and expertise in terms of the family court pond, if you like. They're not really counsellors or psychologists that are exposed to the dynamics that we commonly see happen in the family court, which is fairly nuanced, I think, in some cases. And it seems to me that though, despite the well intentions of those particular professionals, sometimes they cause more issues than good.
Oh, absolutely. I see that quite regularly. Running off to get therapy for the parents, or even taking the kids for therapy. I guess what I'd say is if you're seeing a therapist and they're always agreeing with you, you're probably seeing the wrong person.
Yeah.
Sometimes if they're challenging you and getting you to think about different options and different ways of looking at it, then there's some chance you've got the right person. I call it the difference between counselling and therapy, and I don't mean to I'm not talking about necessarily the type of profession. I'm talking about how people deal with you. But counselling is predominantly supportive and it's sort of predominantly agreeing, whereas therapy is about challenging the underlying beliefs and helping you get a new way of looking at things. And what people need is therapy, not counselling, because often the counselling will reinforce the beliefs and entrench people. So it is important to get people who can help you see the big picture and not just simply align with your picture.
Because those litigants often end up in court and blaming their counsellor at the end of the day because they see a whole new world when it all plays out in court, which is often well too late in the process.
Absolutely. But also if we go back to my little analogy about the business model, what happens is the trouble is most people are trying to be the CEO, and the most highest conflict is that you've got two CEOs. What we've got to realise is their board of directors equal vote. And if people could be more board of director and not CEO, and the worst CEOs are the ones who have a very dictatorial style. So it's got to be my way, and they don't sort of understand that the kids can tolerate a fair degree of variation. So it's got to be my style of CEO management.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that return to the shareholder as the children, I think, is a very powerful image.
Absolutely.
But I also think there's a bit of a silent shareholder, and that is the separated family. It's that ray of hope, or that image of a future that the angry parent doesn't necessarily see. It's their own emotion, their own agenda gets in the way. They don't necessarily see that everything they say and do is writing the script for the entirety of the family and the next chapter in the life of the family. So how do you get, apart from saying, do you realize you're damaging your children? They clearly need to do work on themselves, and you've said the difference between therapy and counselling. But of course, how do you get a horse to water and get that horse to drink? What's your persuasion?
There's no simple way to get people to do that. I sometimes feed back what some of the research says. For example, research says that kids are very aware of who's bad-mouthing the other parent. And in the short term, it doesn't necessarily make a difference. But in the long term, when those kids are now adults, they will hold it against that parent. So it doesn't just evaporate. It doesn't go away. It remains a part of their story into the future. And again, one of the things I try to do is age projection. I go, you have to be happy when your kids are adult. Will they have any resentment about what you've done at this time? And that sort of thing, you've got to think about, in the future, they're going to have graduations, they're going to have weddings, they're going to have children, they're going to have grandchildren. Do you want to be a part of it? And do you want to have a wedding where the two of you are sitting on separate sides throwing things at each other, or do you both want to be on the bridal table? You don't have to like them. You just have to be able to sit with them.
Yeah. I often raise that with clients, Phil, that I always say to them, you know, that what you reap is and so is at the end of the day are the crops. And when these children turn 18, are they going to point the finger at you and say, well, you didn't let me see my dad, or you could call him a so and so, or vice versa, and I don't really want to spend time with you. Because the question is for those parents, do you want your kids to be so well adjusted that they really want to hang out with you, whether it's on holidays or just during the week, or ring you up and say, join me for breakfast, dad or mum? That's the test, isn't it? That's the litmus test. That's what we all want with our kids, that they grow up independent and actually want to have us in their lives.
Absolutely. And as I say, kids are keeping score. And
they are.
Comes out later.
Absolutely.
And the loser is the one who's done all the bad stuff. In the short term, it might win the battle, but it loses the war.
It's so true. I had a random email last week from somebody. I didn't act for this gentleman, but I gave him a ray of hope. And I said, look, sounds to me like your ex-partner has done everything possible to rub you out of your children's lives. But I'm going to make you a promise now. They're going to come looking for you. They're going to want to know who their father is. And he sent me this random email saying, you made me a promise. I don't know how you knew. I didn't hold out much hope at all, but it came true. And I thought that was so rewarding to hear. I call it the bonfire on the beach. I call it the kids being ripped out to sea. And that if you build that bonfire of love on the beach, you have to hope that the rip will let go of the child and the child will head to shore. And I think you've got to build that bonfire with love. They're the parents I really worry about, the parents that have been rubbed out. How else do you get to build hope in those parents who have been excised from their children's lives?
Well, we do know a lot of these kids will seek them out later in life. You can't get back the years you've lost, and that's one of the real tragedies, where kids are effectively isolated and alienated from the other parent. You can't get the years back, but a lot of those kids will seek it out, especially if their early life they had the pre-existing relationship. But you know, when parents get that focused on the winning and on the control, those kids they don't walk away unscathed. They do have long-term psychological problems. I guess, because we're getting towards the end of time for today, one of the things I'd really like to just sort of suggest in terms of advice is, it was explained to me once that before separation, a family is like a continent. And after separation, it's like continental drift. We've now got two separate continents. And there's a little tiny bridge between the two, which people cross. And that's the time, you know, the contact, the access, the time with the other parent. And what parents are so busy doing is they're worrying about what the other continent's doing. They don't look to see what they can do on their continent. And if you can be the best parent you can be with whatever you've got on your side, and if you can ensure that the children get the best opportunities, the best love, the best support, and you can be the best example for them, then there's a fair chance that will be forever in their mind, and that can be the bonfire on the beach later. But while you're busy trying to chuck missiles or send drones across to the other continent, you're missing those valuable opportunities. So I think that's critical.
Absolutely. All right. Well, it looks like about that time. So on the usual roundabout way we do it, over to you, Caroline, for your takeaway from today.
Well, we have to remember that at the heart of all separations where there are families, it's the children that matter most. And Phil, I think you've given parents who are listening to this an invaluable guide to better understand how their behaviour impacts on those children, not just in the short term, but the long term.
Absolutely. What's your takeaway, Phil?
Yeah, well, my takeaway is the only thing you can control is yourself. You can't control them. So do the best job you can, because at the end of the day, like I say, kids keep score, and that score will be paid out when they're adults. and their growing up years, it's 18 years. They don't separate. Usually the separation starts when they're older. So maybe it's 8 or 10 years worth of separation, but you've got another 40, 50, 60 years in their life. That's what you've really got to keep your focus on.
Yeah, we parent for life, don't we?
With parent for life.
Yeah.
And Darren, your takeaway?
My takeaway is, well, I love all these analogies. I'm going to write these down and use them. Bonfires and continents. I really like this. And the CEO of the company. But my takeaway is fairly similar to Phil's, I suppose, and yours a bit too, Caroline, in the sense of I always tell clients the karma bus is always around the corner looking for passengers. So just be careful what you wish for. So using your analogies, stay on your own continent, stay in your own lane, tend your own crops, being the children, and behave yourself. Be nice. Be nice.
I love that.
It doesn't take much to be nice. Phil, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. You're full of wisdom as usual, and I love listening to you talk about these topics because you're such a passionate speaker. And Caroline's going to finish off today by telling people how they might find us.
All right, so this has been another episode of Done and Dusted. If you like this, make sure that you press like in YouTube and you also share it. So the more people, the more parents that we can get behaving better post-separation, the better off the children of Australia will be. So thanks. You've been listening to Done and Dusted.